So take a step back, look at their processes first. As long as your process is up to snuff and everyone's accountable and they're doing the same thing, the software is secondary for sure.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Henrik Becker, who I've known for years. I don't know when the first time we talked was, but it was a long time ago. And Henrik has a very interesting background, having worked in agency, having coached agencies, having done EOS implementation, CRM implementation, and today he runs a firm called Rev Hops, which helps agencies implement better systems for sales and marketing and combines a lot of, your very colored experience to get them to do that in a way that is operationally sound. So with all that, Henrik, I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Exciting.
It's good to see you again, man. So you have had quite an interesting background. You've done a lot of different things and they all kind of seem to be coming to a head with what you're doing today. So why don't we start very quickly with what you do and who you serve, and we talk a little bit about how you got here.
I got into a marketing job after my college years, which is back in 2010 or something. But it was a very systemized approach to marketing. It was an entrepreneur who hired me, and it was very much about, if we turn this lever or we change this step, then we've got a landing page, we've got traffic coming in. And then over the years, that kind of escalated into working with systems like Salesforce and HubSpot. And then one thing I noticed, in 2019, I worked for a marketing automation company in Denver, Colorado called Net Results, where we worked with EOS as a business framework. And what I found so interesting is that if you wanted to do any kind of marketing automation or sales process properly, you kind of had to go all the way to management. You kind of had to, get the systems right from the top in order to really implement things well. And that's how I sort of transitioned into also coaching the consultancies I worked in and for. Actually, that's how I got the first coaching gig. Was I was working with a HubSpot partner, and they said we were doing EOS and had some stuff on the wall. And I said, "You're not doing EOS. Trust me, this is not how it works." Really, you want to show us? Sure, I'll show you. And then we kind of redid their entire EOS approach. And so all of that kind of came to a head last year, where I sat down with a friend and we were like, "Why don't we just combine our collective experience of CRM implementation, Salesforce, HubSpot, and really double down on HubSpot because it's really heading in an awesome direction, and combine it with all the coaching experience where we make sure that in order to implement properly, we first set the stage for that implementation, make sure the processes are established and people are actually implementing something that fits their day-to-day reality instead of just implementing all the cool toys." So
I'm really excited to dig into this today because you and I share a lot of similarities in terms of how we approach the implementation of technology in a firm. It's just that we're doing it in kind of two different areas of the business. You're focused on CRM. We're focused more on the operations side of the business, the time tracking, the project management, and then of course the reporting that comes out of that, finance. But what we share is this idea of the tools being kind of the last step in the process.
Absolutely.
And, the big mistake that we see people make is they take all of their bad assumptions and then they hard code them into a bunch of software and then wonder why it's a mess, wonder why it doesn't work, wonder why the metrics aren't accurate, wonder why they're still confused and not seeing what they need to see. And I'm sure, in our conversations, we talked about this, the same thing is kind of true about CRM implementation. So I'm really excited to talk about, I think at a first principles level, just like what the best practices are to make sure that any technology system that's implemented in the business is properly implemented, and how we kind of abstract away from that and start thinking at a first principles level. So with all that in mind, let's start with the problems that people might be experiencing that tells them they need to take a step back and rethink how they're running, in this case, their CRM, or how they're thinking about that part of their business.
the first thing that people tend to ask me is, hey, we've got a CRM, but we're not, they'll say, we're not sure if we're getting, if we're making the most of it, or if we're, and what they're trying to say is we're paying all this money for this CRM license and we don't feel like, it's worth the investment. That's a clear indication. People aren't using it. So whenever I walk into a business and I start asking questions and I see that people are using Excel sheets to track their deals or something like that, right? Instead of just using that expensive CRM, people aren't using it, which means it's too complicated. They haven't been trained. It doesn't fit the reality. Pick any one of those. I think those are the two big ones for CRM, really, which is adoption and the fact that you're wondering about your investment.
And I would imagine that at the end of that, you run into, I mean, at least this is what we see on the ops side, and I've lived this on the CRM side. They're also just kind of blind, right? So, hey, what is your sales cycle length? I have no idea. What is your average contract value? I have no idea. What has your close rate been the last 6 months? I have no idea. What is the percentage of traffic that converts to leads, the percentage of leads that converts to calls? Like just basic stuff in the 100%. Funnel. It's just not clear because it's not architected to be measuring those things in an accurate and consistent way.
Exactly. Yep. Just the sheer inaccuracy mostly of everything, right? So, oh, look, this is your pipeline. Oh, look, looks like you've got $11 million forecasted. Oh, by the way, 2 million of those are, probably old opportunities that don't need to be there, right? It's like, how are you going to do anything? Data inaccuracies. People don't trust the system, right? And that's basically what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, the lack of trust, man. We hear that all the time too, right? I don't trust this. And so let's talk about how does somebody get there? What are some of the things that they missed, or some of the things that get overlooked that lead somebody to this place where they bought a CRM, 2 years go by, and this is the state of affairs?
I think there's two ways that happens. The first one is that they implemented themselves, and then whatever they start with is not only very much reliant on the person implementing this solution. So, even HubSpot, which is already very incredible out of the box, requires adaptation to the reality of the customer. If that particular person sets it up and then leaves, which they inevitably will, and they haven't documented it and they haven't based it on business processes that exist, then the next person takes over and they have no idea what happened. And so they can't maintain it the way that it was put together. And so the knowledge is kind of lost. And you get to a point where, remember someone set this up, but we don't really, we don't know how to work with it. That's one option. The second one is when you have an implementation partner that does it for you. And then the thing that I see with implementation partners is that they can get the client really excited about all the things that the platform can do. So they just create a list of, why don't we implement all this cool stuff? And then if you have a HubSpot agency, historically speaking, it tends to be a marketing agency that transitioned into CRM implementation because that's where HubSpot started. And if you have a Salesforce agency, that tend to be really more technical. But either way, nobody's asking, how do you do sales? How do you do marketing? What are the steps involved in this process? And how can I create a situation for you where the software supports your process? And then the final thing there, I guess, is accountability. Ultimately, someone needs to be accountable for the database, for what's in there. And, people ask me, do we want, how to make sure it doesn't all go to crap at the end? And it's like, do you have someone internally responsible for making sure it doesn't, right? So
it's so funny how this is all the exact same stuff that we focus on the ops side. These are just first principles of system management. And there's two critical assumptions that I think people make when they're doing an implementation of, it sounds like CRM or ops systems or anything else, that are always wrong, but they're almost always made in this process. The first is that the way we do things is the right way to do them, or the assumptions that we have about how to implement the system are correct, which is often not the case, right? And then the second thing is that things aren't going to change. And the reality is, what I've seen time and time again is we got the CRM when, frankly, our sales and marketing process wasn't that mature. Or on the ops side, we got our ops system set up when our service offerings weren't really that mature. And over the last 2 years, all of the things that you mentioned are true, but also a lot of stuff has changed. And because we didn't have somebody that was really owning this, that was really a steward of data hygiene, of change management, we didn't maintain the system against those changes. We didn't stop to say, oh, we're selling this new thing, we're adding this new channel, we're going to completely restructure how our funnel works, we're going to change how our sales process works. Stopping and saying, okay, great. Let's talk about how this impacts our downstream systems. Let's talk about how we're going to reconcile the old data that we have in there to this new way of doing things. And can we measure across? Like, these are all things that need to get done. But in most organizations, there's nobody stopping to have that conversation. And it speaks to this big idea, which is CRM implementation is not an event, it's a process, but it's often treated as an event, unfortunately. And even if you get it perfect upfront, 6 months later, things are going to have changed. That's just how it works. And you want things to change, right? It's a good sign. It's a sign of a healthy organization that is able to change and adapt. And your implementation and your process around implementation should allow for that change to happen without completely breaking everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why we call it, well, that's why our company name is a play on Rev Hops, because I think that's, for sales and marketing, is revenue operations. That's what it's all about, creating a structure and accountability around those processes and making sure that the systems stay up to date based on what you need. Because that's the other thing that is always that if you're a technical implementation partner, you know how to set up the system, but can you also be a consultant to the customer and say, look, you're at this stage in your company life cycle, you should be looking at. That's the question we keep getting. Like, how do we do sales? Like, we're a 10-person sales team and we cobble together a bunch of ideas. We have no idea what we're doing. Do you know? And fortunately, we do know, so we can help them do that. But it is absolutely different from when it's the 2 of you versus when it's 10 of you versus when it's 50 of you. And that's the change that you need to continue. Basically, you need to keep a handle on it, or you'll get an out-of-date system.
This is where I think your combination of taking kind of the elements of EOS and this framework for, having cadences that connect the dots between upper level management down to execution, and just installing that kind of rhythm and facilitating that, combining that with the expertise of CRM implementation, which is, again, very similar to what we're doing at Parakeeto. It's just kind of interesting how this isn't,
but it doesn't matter. It's all the systems. Yeah.
We arrive here because these are just best practices. I think that's a really interesting piece of how you got here. So walk us through how you would approach a relationship with a client. What are the first things that you're working on? And then how do you stack that into actually connecting the dots into a technology system like HubSpot?
That's, lovely question. I think the number one thing that we always do is first we try to get alignment around the actual problem. So first we do an assessment, or we talk to stakeholders, we look at the system, and all I'm trying to do at first is, do we agree that this, and this is the problem? And here's a couple of ways we could fix that. Can we align on the direction that we're taking? And this is because I don't like to do any project if we don't have a clear problem formulated up front, because otherwise nobody remembers why they were paying the consultants to do anything. But if we make clear, remember, you're working in Excel, everything's manual, you don't have time for sales. Remember why we were doing this? Right. Okay. So that's why we're doing this. The second step is that we look at the processes. So if I ask a client, what's your sales process? And they kind of look at me, what are you talking about? Then I know that I have to workshop it out with them. So I get everyone in the same room, and we basically document their sales process, their marketing process, their metrics, their handovers to the other teams, and of course, accountability. Who is in charge of this process? Who's going to update it? Who's going to train everyone? Once that's set, that's when we can talk about requirements. So how do we get this process into a CRM? What does it need to do? That's when you can they can finally start saying, oh, we want this feature, we want that feature. Great. Does it fit the process? If not, we chuck it. We don't do it. Don't care. We create a design afterward. I like to do a complete solution design up front, so everyone knows what they're getting, and we don't start touching buttons until we actually all have signed off on the scope of what we're doing. Because CRM implementation, one of the biggest problems is, oh, we would also like this, or we would also like that. And I like to avoid that. So then it's implementation after that. What we like to do is, we don't like to, because as you said, it's a process, the implementation. Of course, we do the first part. We're the experts. We help you get going. We help train the internal team. We set that person. We make sure that it's clear to everyone who owns this stuff. And we stick around. We like to stick around for like a year and help them, implement new things or adapt and really get that way of thinking in there. Like, hey, every month you have to look at, is it working? Is it still serving you? Do we need to change anything? But we really want to make the customer responsible for their own success and not be like the consultancy that's holding your hand, because ultimately, that value diminishes as well, I think. So that's how we approach it. Is that similar to what you do?
It is very similar. And there's a thing here that I want to pause and double click on, because I think it's really important, which is when it comes to this part that you mentioned of, okay, let's build the implementation plan. I think the fact that you're sticking around afterwards to help manage this kind of long tail of implementation, we do the same thing. That is such an advantage because it creates a container where you can dramatically reduce the scope of the initial implementation. And to me, this is such an important thing. And I say this to my team all the time, is like, our responsibility as consultants is by and large to protect the client from themselves. The reason they're in this position is because they made decisions in the past, and those decisions led them to a place they didn't want to be. And so what I found is most of the job in that transition from we have the process to here's the implementation plan is talking the client out of doing a whole bunch of things that are just going to slow them down, right? Especially when you talk about systems like CRM, or in our case, an ops reporting system, where it's a hub and spoke and it touches a whole bunch of up and downstream systems. So for example, in our case, it's like, we want to import all of our active pipeline deals from our CRM into our forecasting system. It's like, okay, great. Let's make that a phase 2. Because if we do it now, we are now going to be blocked by 8 weeks of working with your sales team to completely restructure how their HubSpot is set up so that those objects can correspond. It's like, do we really want to block our ability to forecast anything for 8 weeks when we could have it next week if we just say that's not a requirement right now, that's a phase 2 thing, right? Like that's almost every conversation is trying to get them to let go of a bunch of unnecessary complexity and say, let's just get this first simple version and get you some quick wins, get you some initial value. And then we'll start layering in complexity where it's actually going to have ROI. And often what we find is 80% of the things that they thought they wanted, they realize we don't actually really need that. We're getting what we need out of this simple thing that's a much easier to run. And like, I want to say that out loud because like, that's what we're thinking as consultants is just like, how do we get the clients to agree to a scope that's not setting themselves up for failure? Because this has been their issue is they try to over-engineer everything up front. I want people to hear that so that when you start getting resistance from somebody like Henrik or myself, that it's coming from a good place. Like we're just trying to get you successful initially so that we can build on that.
Yeah. It's just get in there and use it. Right. And get familiar with it. And so we'll set up the basics and then we'll get going. And I find so many times, I'm sure you have the same experience, that 2 to 3 months of actually running with it changes everyone's perspective massively. Oh, now that I work with it, I mean, the most fun for me is always I had a client with this where the person in charge of the CRM was Salesforce and HubSpot. And he was like, I don't know about HubSpot. And then we're in it and he's worked with it for a little bit. He's like, oh my goodness, this is so easy. But you just have to use it for a little bit, right? Just let your assumptions go. And then you'll find out you don't need all these things, right? You don't need all this extra stuff. So,
and it's really interesting because it's like, we know that these are best practices in all these other frames, right? So Agile versus Waterfall. Like there's a reason Agile completely took over software development. But why do we still treat a CRM implementation as like a waterfall project as opposed to taking more of an Agile approach? Yes, there's a bunch of thinking that should go in up front, but then can you like just focus on getting quick wins, getting surface area?
Well, I want to speak to that though, because because I'll tell you why that is. Because I find that in many, many cases where people use Agile, they use Agile as an excuse for not having their shit together when they start. they're just like, why don't we agile it? And it's like, yeah, but you haven't done your homework. And if you've done that, so because especially on something like a Salesforce implementation, which takes from 3 to 6 months, right? But I can do HubSpot in half that time because it's easier. And if I do my homework well and the process is clear, it doesn't take me weeks to set it up. I don't have to agile it because it's very clear. After that point, I do like to agile it when we get to incremental improvements. Yeah.
But that's kind of the idea, right? Is like, so much of that is a function of saying there's all of these nice to haves that we're actually going to remove from the initial scope so that we can get you something in a couple of weeks that's working, and then we can build on it. And we know the same thing is true about, like, for example, building a software product or building really any product. This idea of product market fit, building a minimum viable product. Like, I think the same kind of principle is often true with something like this, where it's like, what's the minimum viable implementation? And then once we have surface area with the team, we'll be in such a better place to make judgment calls about where to actually build all of these more speculative features and functions that we think we need or think we want, but we don't actually know if those are going to make sense. Like, building that in the context of we're actually using it and we have a feedback mechanism versus building that in a black box and then hoping that this all works when we launch it. And it's this massive spider web of complexity. It's just like, it's not a good approach. And we know that in these other places, but we don't often think about that in terms of like, what is the product process fit within our own organization? And how do we iterate towards that in a way that's less risky and less time consuming and less expensive?
It's just something that it's what I've seen with many agencies is that the client wants to get started. And it's also when a client is in a certain headspace, when they want to sign, then, there's pressure on it to keep going, and there's pressure from the top to get going, and we'll do it agile, we'll start. But then the client hasn't done the thinking. So you have to get the client through the thinking before you can get to the implementing. But the client doesn't want to do the thinking because they signed for implementation. And so there's pressure on there to actually build something. And that's when you get agile. That's just about, it's more like busy work that's when you get CRM projects that start to turn into double the time that was first planned, because you get to something like a product catalog and the client hasn't thought about it. Like, actually, what's wrong with our catalog? Well, you don't have one. It's like it's 1,000 line items. What the hell do you think we're supposed to do, right? We have to get you through the thinking of, does it have to be this way? Is your product strategy the right one? Blah, 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 everything like that. And that's when it takes forever. And so when I hear agile in CRM, my first response is a bit of allergy because I've seen it misused so many times. But otherwise, I MVP and then iterate for sure. Yeah,
you raise a really good point, right? But like that, this is all after having sat down and really gotten clear on the problem that we're solving, our thesis for that, mapping out the process, like, for sure, that's the work that has to happen up front. And then it's just a question of, what is the kind of implementation mechanism that we can use to not initially over-engineer this thing? Or, the other big trap that I see people fall into is they design this system that is so operationally complex that it sets them up for failure, in that it's just like way too big of a change way too soon. And they don't consider things like, let's take a CRM example. I want to know these 15 different things about every lead. It's like, okay, well, do you think your sales team is going to go from 0 to logging 15 different pieces of metadata on every single client in a structured way and following a consistent naming convention? It's like, no. So like, what are the most important 3? Let's make sure they can do 3. Then we can start building towards the 15. But if we start with the 15, you're going to end up with nothing because you try to track everything. So it's like that idea of just like not considering how operationally feasible is this actually, like, in practice, that we're going to do this, and only thinking about this theoretical output is such a mistake. And then you do that in 15 different places, and all of a sudden it's just a giant mess.
You open up a screen and you, as a user, you're like, why are there 40 fields that I have to fill out? This only works in Germany, by the way. I had a German client. Germans will do whatever they're told, man, but not the Dutch. Not over here.
Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it.
So to put, so this speaks to like, you've done a lot of work in Europe, you've done a lot of work in the US. And you recently, we were chatting a little bit about this before the show, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to bring up to kind of close this out, which is you've recently made a decision to stop trying to build kind of a big organization with a team and focus on being a consultant and really designing this business around what you want your lifestyle to look like. And we had a really interesting chat about this because it's something that I wish more people would put some thought into. I think we've both had this experience of like getting on the treadmill for a couple of years and sprinting our asses off and then lifting our head up and being like, wait a second, what the hell am I doing? So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Tell us about your journey getting to this point.
I didn't actually go down that path, right? I've never tried to hire a bunch of people and build something, but I did end up working for a lot of agencies and a lot of consultancies, and I ended up coaching them. And I saw the same thing over and over again, which is a couple of senior people doing something that they were good at, hiring more folks to help them, and then ending up with basically more people, but not more profit. And then of course, you launched your course. I went through that and I saw the light, and I thought to myself, this is what they're doing wrong. They're delivering a product, but they don't have any profit at the end. They don't have the economics figured out. But I also think that inherently, it's a choice. The choice is, do you want to build something with a bunch of people that you might enjoy doing, right? Many people love doing this. They want to build a team. They want to work with a lot of people. They want to show up in an office every day or, even remotely and work with a bunch of people. But I think that you really need to nail down that, that delivery margin, the thing that, that you talk about in your course is where if you don't have 50 to 60% left after you've delivered your product, then you don't have enough to play with to build a profitable agency. And what I see is that even some of the more respectable agencies that I've worked with in this country, where I'm like, you guys are not making any money, right? So you've got a bigger asset, but you're not making money. Like you could not do it and make as much money, and it's a choice. And then you're pouring in all your time and energy into that thing. And again, I think you can end up with something really cool and something you potentially sell or make money or whatever. But I figured the other thing that really annoys me with agencies that, senior person walks in, sells the project, he does all the client work and then hands it over to two juniors. And the client's like, who are these guys, right? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be the business consultant and do, most of the work myself, and then create an agency model where, my face is on the website, my business partner James's face is on the website. People talk to us. We get leads because people find us, they go to the website, they go like, I want to work with these guys. Look at them, they're great, right? They love our photos and they love the vibe and they love what we're saying and they want to work with us. And so that's what we're doing. And we've created a setup where both of us can live a really comfortable life. We both have families, we have kids. We don't want to work for 60 hours. We want to be really good at what we do with a select bunch of clients and make a good living. And that's what we're doing. So that's a very conscious choice that I don't think everyone's making.
Well, and that's, it's funny because like here I am, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. Like, I want to build a big team. I believe that that's possible for Parakeeto. I believe that we can create outsized enterprise value because we have a technology component to our business. But like that is a deliberate choice that I made. And what I know is I'm deferring a shitload of cash flow to do this. Because the reality is, I don't think a lot of people realize this, is like, you want to be a solo consultant, maybe have another partner, like you have maybe a couple of freelancers, an assistant, leverage yourself. Like you can make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in your pocket as income running that kind of a model. To get back to that kind of compensation as an owner, you basically have to get the 3 million plus in revenue. And even then, as you've seen, you have to be running a very good business to be pocketing that kind of money as an owner, even at that scale. That risk profile is very different. And it's more of an asset building play than it is a cash flow play. You're going to give up a lot of that cash flow and push those chips back into the investment. So it's very high risk. It's not even necessarily higher reward. And it depends on if you value this kind of bigger outcome or the liquidity along the way. And to your point, I don't think a lot of people are stopping to say like, okay, which of these paths do I want to go down? What is the difference in risk profile? What is the difference in liquidity along the way? What do I value more?
What do you want to do all day?
Right. What kind of job do I want to have? Because my job is very, very different than your job day to day. And my job is going to continue to change. Right. And so like, do I actually want to do that kind of work? Do I want to do that kind of professional and personal development that's required to do that kind of work? Right. So like, that is a conscious choice that I've made. And a lot of people question why I would possibly do that when the option that you've taken is so attractive, and it is very attractive.
But I'm curious, why did you choose it?
Because I know that what we're doing at Parakeeto will be somebody will build $1 billion company solving the problem that we solve in the way that we solve it. The question is just who's it going to be? I believe that we are in the best position in the world to be that $1 billion company. So I want to take that shot. I want to go after it. And the way that we've designed this business, we have a golden safety net built in, right? So we have, from a strategy perspective, hedged ourselves against the potential that this doesn't work, that this big bet doesn't work. But I really feel that we have that opportunity, which is like not the case if you, I don't know, sell SEO or like do accounting. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just not...
Or not even, HubSpot consultancy.
Right. Like you can build a great business and build a big team, but you're not going to create outsized enterprise value in a mature industry or in a mature space like that. But we're like very blue ocean.
You're solving a problem that most people don't even realize there is a solution to. That's what I think.
Right. And we're doing it in a way that is unique. We're building proprietary technology that hasn't been built before. Like there's a lot of aspects of this that are really novel. It's very high risk, but I also don't think anyone else in the world is positioned better to take this on, and the timing is right. But if we didn't do it, I know that somebody will. It's much more fun now than it was for the last 6 years. Yeah, that's for sure. It was a grind, right?
It's been a journey, right?
It has been a journey. Yeah. And so much of that has been finding product market fit, which is a really humbling experience because like I know that I'm a good executor. And I know my co-founder is a good executor. Right? We have a track record, but none of that matters when you don't have product market fit. Right. And finding product market fit is just it's brute force engineering. You have to try things. You have a thesis. You try to validate that thesis. You do experiments. And it's like, you don't know how many experiments it's going to take for you to start to find the answer. And so it doesn't matter how competent you are at business until you find product market fit. And until you find it, it's just going to suck. And it took us like, a little over 4 years to start finding product market fit. Then it took us about a year, maybe 18 months to like really start to lock it in. And then everything started to click. And now it's much more fun. My day to day is a lot more enjoyable. But for many, many years, it was very, very hard. And yeah, I could have made way more money just saying, this is going to be the Marcel and Ben show. I'll do all the work myself. That would have been a lot easier and I would have had a lot more cash flow. But that's not
you're aiming
what we're
higher.
Here to do.
I respect that. Yeah.
But look, it's like I don't think that I don't think what I'm trying to do is better. It's just different.
Yeah.
And it just depends on what it was important, right? And like so I didn't need the liquidity in the short term. I didn't value it as much as pursuing this kind of idea, this problem, right? Like we're very invested in that as founders. So it's just different. And I know the message in this conversation to people listening is like, just stop and think about that. Think about what you actually want, because
what do you want?
These are very different paths. They're very different paths.
It's just sort of an auto, like I said, it's just a couple of, seen this so many times where, two guys like me and James would be, we're both doing HubSpot. Why not do it together? Oh, we're getting a bunch of clients. Oh, actually it's more than we want to handle. Let's hire a couple more people. That's where the problems start, by the way. Just hire a few more people, because it's not easy to just hire a few more people, especially when the juniors and you expect them to do certain things. I mean, we could get into the whole Gen Z topic, but when you expect them to do it at a certain level and they can't, or you have to teach them, you have to train them, you have to get them to the next level. Then they can leave, which is another thing that I saw with so many agencies, right? You train people up, and then whatever, Deloitte comes along and doubles their salary, and poof, they're gone. And that's the game you need to make that choice if you want to play that game. And I think that if you want to go for, I guess, bigger goals, even if we're just talking, HubSpot ecosystem, if you want to be a top agency, you're going to have size. There's a whole group of customers, especially now that HubSpot is moving up market, that will never work with a 2-man shop like us, but they will work with a 70-man shop, and that's fine, right? I go for it, do that. And those are very different projects, very different ways of doing this particular thing that we're doing. And if you enjoy that, then that's what you should build. But for us, the choice was very conscious. No, we want to work with and we have some really, really interesting that's what I love about the States, by the way. Even the mid companies, larger SMBs, not enterprise, just below that, can have massive volumes. Like when you walk into a company with a database of 500,000 people in HubSpot, I have not seen a single company in the Netherlands with that kind of, that many contacts in their database, even if they're enterprise. And I work with some of the larger companies here. We don't have that many people. It doesn't happen. So, but those are clients that we can handle. We can work with those teams. We can add a lot of value there. We're fast enough for them. They're fast enough for us. And that's what we like to do. And as you said, we can make a very healthy living doing it without having to be stressed all the time or get even grayer than I already am. So,
well, I'm glad we took that tangent. Now, to wrap things up, any final words of advice just to kind of tie a bow on the CRM implementation side of things? If somebody's thinking about changing CRMs or they're struggling with their CRM, what are the final words of wisdom you want to leave them with?
Yeah, it's not about the software. Although, and I say that as a massive HubSpot fan, but it's about take a step back, and before you do anything, or you're fed, let's say you're fed up with your CRM system, the first thing you should do is, like I said, assess first what's your problem, why are you upset with it, what's wrong, and then look at your processes. Do you have a clear and adhere to, right? That's EOS. Is it followed by all? Do you have that process? Is it documented? Is it, it could be on your wall. I like to do that. I just create stupid little blocks in Google, whatever, but I give them to a designer. It's like, turn this into something awesome. So you can have your sales process on the wall and we all know what you're doing. So take a step back, look at their processes first, and then see if that, if you turn that into a requirements discussion, if your CRM is capable of housing that process. And for everyone else, I think everyone on Salesforce needs to wonder whether they actually need that kind of customization, whether they could take a step to HubSpot. Everyone needs to do HubSpot. But even for some people, you don't even need it at all, maybe. So I've seen people do wonders with Monday, as long as your process is up to snuff and everyone's accountable and they're doing the same thing. The software is secondary for sure.
Mm-hmm. Wise words, good advice. I would second it. With all of that, Henrik, for those that want to learn more about you, follow what you're talking about on the internet, where should we send them in the show notes?
We should send them to probably revhops.com. So that's revhops.com. And you can absolutely find me on LinkedIn, and I will post regularly to make fun of Salesforce and hopefully also share other things.
Awesome. Well, with that, links to RevHops and Henrik's LinkedIn in the show notes. Always a pleasure to hang out and chat with you, Henrik. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. So much fun.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.